the man phases in and out of consciousness from time to time as he's mowing the grass. And these little stories come up. Sometimes they're larger, sometimes they're smaller. The vignettes are not necessarily in chronological order, but they are stream of consciousness. One day it's about my daughter and her birth and her birth problems, and the next one might be something else. My father, who was a military guy, and him planting a tree and then grafting 5 different apples to it, and so we had this. I called it the magic apple tree when I was a kid. And these are stories that have come to me over the last year and a half, and they're very dear to me and funny. Most of them is really a lot of fun, but there's stories that are very heartfelt, and some of them were very difficult to write, and others were, I like to say, I couldn't see the keyboard through the tears. Some of them were from laughing and some of them were not.
Hey everyone, and welcome. I am Morgan Giss McDonald, founder, CEO of Paper Raven Books. And I have with us a super special guest today who is just launching his brand new book called The Unexpected New Best Friend. He is an athlete at heart, a strength trainer by trade, and a storyteller. And he tells us a heck of a lot of entertaining and thought-provoking and tear-jerking stories in this new memoir. Mike Duby, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
We're super excited because we're launching your memoir. And this is, a big moment for you because it's a little bit of a change of pace for you, right? If you've worked in the sort of athletic, training and fitness for many years. And so now you're kind of coming out and telling a lot of the stories from your life. And I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about kind of what inspired you to write this book and who do you hope picks it up?
Well, the reason that I contacted you guys in the first place was I had gotten a little bit of bad news from my doctor at one point, and I thought, man, if I need to get these stories out while I can still tell them, and so. That's basically the motivation, was to be a book that I would write for my children and pass that on to them. And as it came out, as it started kind of hitting the paper or hitting the screen, however that works. But as it started to develop, I thought, this is pretty darn funny stuff. And I think maybe other people would be interested in these stories, these little vignettes. And then I got a hold of you guys at Paper Raven, and I never did figure out what Paper Raven, where that name comes from, but that's okay. But you did something very special. When we met online, you did not pressure me to sign up and contract with you. I had a lot of questions. Sure you will remember. I had a lot of questions, and you answered them all. And you were great at the time. You still are. And the way you handled my particular entrance into writing really made sense. And I'm not trying to make this a commercial for you, but that's what it's turning into. But Morgan, you make sense when you told me what was going to happen in the process. And it made sense that I start it now. And that was about a year and a half, a year and 3/4 ago. Basically, it started out as a family memoir, and it's turned into something I think that maybe other people will be interested in hearing.
And I remember when you first brought the book to me and I read it, and you had this very interesting sort of construction of story where in the present day, you have the protagonist, which is you, right? It's a memoir, but the
The
protagonist is
man.
referred to as the man, right? He's
Yes.
sort of like he almost feels like the everyman, but they're from your life. And so, we have this present day. The man encounters this bird, and spoiler alert: the bird is the unexpected new best friend.
Oh,
And
you
so
gave it away.
it's and so you see this present day interaction between the man and this bird. And while there's this sort of present day timeline happening, you also have these flashbacks into the man's life and sort of what has brought him to this moment. And it was just it's such a fascinating, like engrossing experience for the reader to have this interplay of these two things. And I still think that's like, one of the highlights of the book, and what makes it one of the things. There are several things, many things that make it special. But this willingness to play with the characters and with the stories and how the story comes out. And you are, to your point, you're like, they're funny stories, and even when the stories are sometimes they're more sad or reflective, and sometimes they're just silly and funny. I'd love for you to tell us a little bit, like give us kind of a flavor of what the man might tell a story about.
Well, one thing comes to mind, and I don't even know where it came from. The story starts with him going out to mow the grass, and he's got this brand new lawn mower. As he's mowing the grass and he's going clockwise around the yard, he stops and thinks for a second and says, I mean, his life is so dull that he has all kinds of thoughts going through his mind. And as the author, as Mike, um, it's something that I would think of. But uh, he stops and scratches his head and says, I wonder if I was in the southern hemisphere, would I be going the other way? And when that line came to me, it dawned on me. I said, where did that come from? But it's exactly what every guy on this planet would understand, that thought process. The book actually started out with vignettes. I think I had, let's call it 20 of these little stories. And one of the reasons I needed you guys is to help me stitch it together into something that would be interesting to read. And the man phases in and out of consciousness from time to time as he's mowing the grass. And these little stories come up. Sometimes they're larger, sometimes they're smaller, but these little stories, these little vignettes were very nicely stitched together by your crew. The vignettes are not necessarily in chronological order, but they are stream of consciousness. One day it's about my daughter and her birth and her birth problems, and the next one might be something else. My father, who was a military guy, and him planting a tree and then grafting 5 different apples to it, and so we had this. I called it the magic apple tree when I was a kid. And these are stories that have come to me over the last year and a half, and they're very dear to me and funny. Most of them is really a lot of fun. I mentioned my daughter. That was not fun at all. She had 3 open heart surgeries before she turned 1. And the 4th one came about 5 years later. We nearly lost her several times. And it was a very hard chapter to write. Now, writing about am I going counterclockwise or clockwise is pretty funny. Having your daughter in your arms and you don't know if she's going to be alive for the first year of her life. And if she was even going to wake up across the first 5 years of her life, we never really knew what was going to happen. But there's stories that are very heartfelt, and some of them were very difficult to write, and others were, I like to say, I couldn't I couldn't see the keyboard through the tears. Some of them were from laughing and some of them were not.
Yeah, I think that is what pulls the reader in. When I think about being in the pages of the book and inside of these stories, is, to some extent, on one hand, some of the stories are of like the simple life and the small, funny things. Many of our kind of shared, like sort of common experiences, especially kind of in like, what you might consider like a typical American kind of upbringing that, we might all kind of remember, something about mowing a lawn or trying to fix something in the shed or just kind of home life, yard life.
Yeah, I think it's stuff that people can relate to because I know that they have whole hospitals and chains of hospitals who deal with children who had the problems that I had with mine. And I, I looked back at it and I said, I thought I was the only one.
Yeah.
And I know that I'm not, but I think it can be really relatable to a person picking up and reading that story and having had the same problems.
Exactly.
And they can look at that story and say, that's my life too.
Yeah. And so we can meet you very easily on some of the more just casual, light, superficial things. And then we come in on a deeper level. When
Yes.
you introduce us, you help us to meet your daughter, especially when she was young and going through the open heart surgeries. You introduced us to your dad and your brother and the military history and what it felt like to be a part of a family where other people were serving in the military and you chose not to. And, those deeper discussions that are part of what make us who we are. And you're right. I mean, they're entirely relatable. We might think that we're the only ones. And yet when you kind of write these stories and invite us into them, you help us to feel like, okay, I'm not alone. Was that part of maybe what your hope?
Yeah, as I got into it, I didn't intend to have it come out like that until I started reading it on the page as I was writing it. Some of this is really heavy stuff that people have had to go through, and they may be thinking that they're the only ones, and they're not. The title of this book is The Unexpected New Best Friend. The subtitle is, if there's a broken one on the shelf, I'll be the one who ends up with it. And when I came up with that, I didn't know how significant it would be. When I tell other people that story, they start saying, yeah, I can relate to that. And I laugh every time I see that title because it's so true to me. It's so true to my life. And it's laughable in most places, but it's very serious in others.
So, okay, give us an example. If there's a broken one on the shelf, like I'm going to be the one who picks it up. What does that look like in life?
I just happen to have one of those stories available. And you did not even ask me for it, but I'm going to tell it to you. And it's recent, within the last couple of months. I went into the store, the hardware store, and I needed 8 bolts, little bolts. And 4 of them needed to be this long, and 4 of them needed to be this long. And so I got the bolts and I came home. Now, going out to the store and coming home is about 20 miles out and 20 miles back. So you got to make the run count. So I got the stool I needed the bolts for, put it on the pavement, and I started putting them in. One of them was right on the last 4. So I ended up having to go back to the store 20 miles out, and I laid them out for the guy on the counter, and I said, these bolts are wrong. And I am furious right now, but it's going to go in my story. It's going to go in my book because it outlines perfectly what I'm trying to tell you. If there's a broken one on the shelf, or if there's a wrong one on the shelf, I'm going to get it. And it happens more often than I care to remember, but now I can laugh at it. because it's the life theorem.
And you guys, if y'all are here and you're watching and you're kind of like nodding your head and chuckling along, like you'll probably like this book. The good news is you can actually get a free copy today. If you go to paperhavenbooks.com/the unexpected new best friend, all one word, and I'll link it up next to this video. So you can just click that link right there. It'll take you over to the Amazon page. You can grab a free ebook right now and you can load it up on your Kindle for the weekend. But go ahead and do it now while you're thinking about it. And of course, the book will be available paperback, hardback, all the versions. So yeah, go ahead and check that out today so you can grab more of Mike's stories. And Mike, you know, what's fascinating about the way that you tell stories is that you don't mind getting into those like frustrating moments and really just teasing him out and helping us really like feel the frustration. And I think what it does to us is it helps us turn that into something more lighthearted, kind of like you were saying. It's like, well, if we can really tease it out and laugh at it and realize, okay, this is, you know, it's just part of the human experience. It helps to make more sense of our lives, and it helps it feel less heavy.
It helps us get through the really hard times, and realizing that my life has actually been pretty good with a few exceptions. And God has been really gracious in bringing me through those. And then still be able to laugh at missing 4 bolts and driving 40 miles to get those bolts back. I can just say, this is my life. And I just hope that somebody else, if one other person who reads this book calls me or writes me and says, I thought I was the only one, Mike, that would mean everything. It would mean everything to know that that person was helped.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why we do it, for that reader who's waiting for it. And Mike, I mean, I want to acknowledge that this was like a big pivot for you to become a writer, you know? I mean, like,
yeah.
You had, you know, what I know from our, you know, time together is you had, you know, a career in sales, you had a career in fitness and training, and then to say, okay, yes, I know that I tell stories. Now I'm going to turn that into writing a book. Like, what was that process like for you to sit down and say, all right, I am writing these stories, I'm writing a book? Do you remember what that process was like for you?
Well, the doctor's visit was a big push in that way. But not only was I in sales, I sold computers before the desktop computer was born. And then I did that for about 7 or 8 years. And then I did my own computer business for another, and I sold World Book Encyclopedia for a while. And I really enjoyed that. And then for 17 years, I had a company called Tobin's Lab, and we supplied educational materials for homeschooling families. And then I ended up opening up this studio, and I've been doing this for 17 years. So I guess my period of time to do a certain thing is 17 years, 16 or 17 years. And then you got to switch to something else. And that's kind of what happened. I did a couple of presidential campaigns, election campaigns, not the door-to-door stuff, but up in the upper echelons of the campaigns. And so to write a book really never occurred to me until I got the news. If you'd asked me 2 years ago, are you going to be a writer? I'd say, no. What do I have to write about? Well, then I sat down and started writing, and I got a lot to write about.
And do you remember like where you started? Did you just kind of go back into your memory and just pull up, you know, a scene and just start writing what was in kind of your memory from that time?
When I started, I don't know if I really had a clear outline in my head of the man and who he was, I just started writing out events that I wanted my son to know about, my son and daughter to know about, and started writing. And then I'm not even really sure when the man was born. In the book, I am the narrator, and I also happen to be the man. And so separating those two is kind of a little bit of a chore, but it was the first creative step that I made in that journey.
So people are always curious about, like, how do you sort of sit down and write a memoir? And so what I would maybe suggest from what you're sharing with us here, Mike, is that, like, even if you don't really have a plan, you can start with some stories. You'll be able to come back and add more description in later if you need to. And, over time you might discover, oh, wait, I'm going to put in a character like the man, or maybe there will be, an unexpected new best friend kind of character who kind of brings the reader through. That these things really developed over time, and not even a decade, right? We're talking like a year and a half, basically, of just once you committed to that, I'm going to write this, even though I don't have a plan. I wouldn't call myself a grammar specialist, and you went through and added things over time. It still can come together. Is
Absolutely. And when I started, I had a wire binder, and I just started putting the reminders of what the event was, and then flesh it out later. The editor took Kate, when Kate started helping me with stitching the vignettes together. That was my problem. That's why I hired you guys in the first place. It's because I couldn't figure out how to bring the vignettes together into a cohesive story. And I just didn't know how to do it. And so she said, well, we need some transitions. What the hell is a transition? What's that? In one case, I've got the man he's out mowing the grass, and in the next instant, he's in a delivery room. How does that work in real life? I'm not a writer at heart, but I know what I wanted to say, and hopefully I've done a pretty good job of saying it.
And that is, Mike, I don't think you realize how inspiring that could be to someone who is listening to you tell stories and is reading The Unexpected New Best Friend and thinking, I like to tell stories too. I wonder if there's something of a memoir in here for me. To hear that you learn what you need when you need it in the writing process, I think can be a source of great encouragement to other storytellers and other folks. And I'm curious, like, if you could go back to a younger version of yourself and say, hey, Mike, let me tell you something about becoming an author. Is there anything that comes to mind that you might wish you could tell a younger version of yourself?
Well, I was never really interested in doing a diary or a journal. Call it whatever you want to call it. I was never really interested in doing that. I just wanted to do and get it done with. But if you're a Star Trek fan, they take journals. The captain runs his journal every day so that they can now tell those stories to us through the camera. Something I haven't said yet in this interview is the stories that are in my book are, at best case, absolutely true. Worst case, 95% true, 95 to 98% true. So my memoir, this has turned into something that this guy really worked. It really happened. This happened to him and he made it through. I would just say, take notes.
Yeah.
Have something to start with. I had to write notes down when I decided to do this. I just wrote down notes. And I've got notes for number 2 over here.
And I will say that's one of the things that, for anyone who does write, whether it's just part of their life to include in a book, or even if they're using real life as inspiration for a novel, or certainly when they're writing a memoir, that's a common wish that people is like, I wish I had been taking notes, even like one-liner notes of what happened today. Cause then I could have gone back and just scanned and tried to remember things. Cause I mean, as you know, you get to the end of producing a book and you're like, oh, I forgot this happened. And now you're trying to, to include things in the draft or in the production of the book. And it's like, if we were to have had notes, even, maybe not your whole life, but like from a season of your life, that could have helped jog your memory a little bit more. But that's just, it's part of the writing process also, is that self-reflection and reprocessing some of those memories in those moments.
Well, and there's one other thing. When Kate got a hold of my manuscript, and we were starting to stitch the things together, I will point out that she used most of the vignettes. I think I only lost one that I wanted to leave in. She said, we can leave it in, but this one doesn't really carry the story forward. And so I thought, okay, that makes sense. So we'll leave it out. Well, guess what? I picked it back up again, and it's going to go onto the website. It's a chapter that I'm going to put on the website. So, Kate, neener, neener, neener.
When you have a bone to pick with your editor, you're going to.
I am going to. Yeah, but there's nobody who's ever told me something that was nonsensical. Brian had a wonderful comment about the story, and I asked if I could quote him, so I'm going to quote him here in this video. His closing comment was beautifully written and very, very fun. And he couldn't have said anything nicer to me. And when Kate started working the thing, I was astonished that we were going to get to use all but one. And she was very helpful. I mean, all of your people, I'm going to say it again. You guys are great.
Well, thank
You're
you.
worth every dime.
Oh, thank you. We appreciate that. And we feel pretty darn lucky because we get to help you create amazing books like this one. So I want to give you guys, if you're here with us, you've hung on, you're like, I like the way Mike tells these stories. Good news is you're going to like the book, and the book you can get a free copy of today. So go to paperravenbooks.com/the unexpected new best friend, all one word. There'll be a link next to this video that you can click. It'll take you over to Amazon, grab a free copy of the ebook, load it up on your Kindle for this weekend or next week, but go ahead and do it now while you're here and thinking about it. And if you prefer the physical copy, there's a physical copy there for you as well. So Mike, any sort of parting words for your readers?
Enjoy the book. Know that all of it is from the heart, and it's not made up. There are people who have gone through the hard times as well as the good times and the no-brainer times. Yes, you probably would be mowing the grass the other way if you lived in the Southern Hemisphere. But I would just say stick with it and make it from your heart.
Yeah, perfect. All right. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, everyone, for hanging out with us. Y'all have a good day, and we will see you next time. Bye, everybody.